So just to let you guys know how this next segment will run, so we're going to conduct a panel discussion. I'll introduce our panelists shortly, and then we will be conducting a Q&A post that. For the media guys, you guys already would have been briefed, but you can send your questions through to Michelle at the back there. Michelle, please wave so everyone knows where you are. And then she will pass the questions on to me to facilitate that post the panel discussion. Cool, but let's kick off. So I've already introduced most of my panelists here, but I'm going to do a quick round of introductions again, just so that everyone is aware. So to my left, closest, is Lyle Eckstein, and he is our Chief Product Officer and co-founder at Ozow. So Lyle really has been responsible for building our initial tech stack on the onset of Ozow, and now his responsibility has shifted to looking to the future and implementing our new product infrastructure and also enhancing our current infrastructure as well. And as part of that, of course, we're looking at our partnerships with the banks as well as our engagement with the regulators. So a great person to have on board on the panel because he knows the past, the present, and the future from an Ozow perspective. Then we have Mpho. You guys have all met him already, head of real-time payments at BankServe, but he's got a great deal of experience. He looks like a young man, but I think you've got about 14 years of experience in payments and banking altogether when I looked at your bio. And he's a Nedbank man as well. So yeah, he's got some hardcore banking experience as well. And so does Gary. So Gary Stone joined Ozow recently as head of payments and regulatory. But Gary has extensive experience in the payments industry, also from BankServe. You served most of your time at BankServe in a number of different roles there. But Gary really was heading up a lot of the product infrastructure at BankServe, from EFT through to some of the card products as well. Then we have Busi Radebe, who is from Capitec. Busi heads up card and electronic payments at Capitec. Also, I think I'll just say this for everyone, a great deal of payments experience across the board. But Busi is really responsible for driving both bank API strategy from a Capitec Pay perspective and the RPP strategy within Capitec as well. So great alignment from a panel, not just from their shirt colors, but also from the fact that these guys have the right amount of experience. Then we have Gabriel Swanepoel, who is the country manager for MasterCard for Southern Africa. Gabriel, very interestingly, I think you're a bit of the outlier on the panel today from a card perspective, but what you attempted to run away. But ultimately, Gabriel is responsible for Southern African strategy from a MasterCard perspective, and that really does have a big part to play with collaboration with their partners, which they reference as fintechs, banks, and retailers as well, and merchants. So Gabriel, I think, very well positioned to comment on some of the topics we'll be speaking about today. So that is your panel, and I'm going to kick off firstly by addressing one of the points that Mpho did speak to in his presentation, but I want to give an opportunity for the rest of the guys to also comment on this. And this really is around the concept of open banking and how it's been implemented in other countries. So we know that open banking is a core concept, and bringing it a bit closer with RPP is not a new concept. It may be or seem like a new concept in South Africa, but it's been implemented very successfully in other countries, both from a first world perspective, such as the UK, but also some of the BRICS nations and third world countries, such as Brazil and China as well. So Gary, I actually want to pose this question to you as well, because you and I have spoken extensively on the topic, and I know that you've had some anecdotal stuff to tell me around the topic. But tell me what you understand, what you've learned from the implementation from an open banking and RPP perspective in broader countries, what the learnings are that we've taken in from a South African context, and any interesting points that you've found that are worth sharing with our audience.
Cool. Look, I think, Shailin, when you opened the conference, you used the word modernization, and I think that's pretty key. And some of the things that Mpho presented were certainly a lot of the details around that. So, I'll try not to repeat a lot of that stuff. But at the end of the day, modernization includes a number of different components, and they are consequential. Open banking is one of those, request to pay, digital ID. There's a lot of components that go along with the requirement for modernization, and open banking is one of those. Consequential with that is the fact that you need APIs generally to be able to open it, because that's the data-driven component of modernization. So you've got APIs then that are then tagged at the end of all the requirements to link the digital IDs or to the different components that you want to run, request to pay, etc. But coming back then to the open banking, I think that the one big thing about open banking that wasn't raised earlier was the publication of the PSD2 statutes in the UK, which has been adopted by the Euro as well. And in essence, in like very layman's language, to try and distill what that means is they really were saying that the data that exists on any consumer, wherever that is not the proprietary information of the organization that captured that in the first place. So what open banking was trying to say is that wherever that consumer information is available, if somebody can use that for the good of the consumer, allow them to access the data so that they can present it in a format which is good for the consumer. And really what that is then opened up with everybody is that if a bank or a merchant, like Pick and Pay or whatever, has some data, and you have a fintech or any organization which can access the data for the good of the consumer, allow them to do that. That immediately then has put a big focus on APIs, and to say that APIs are the medium by which you can retrieve information and present it. And it's also a medium that is very easy to update. So if the economy grows, or if the information that is available grows, it just requires data, effectively data changes, and a data dictionary to change in order to get that access to that data and represent it. So I think that's in essence a component of modernization. You asked a little bit more about India, and that I think Impo said quite a bit there. But I think just talking two very good examples. India really tried to demonetize or decash a little bit, and they had a lot of government and regulatory interference, and it cost the country. I think there were a lot of people ended up in quite bad situations because they withdrew a whole set of the rupee notes. Nevertheless, the government went ahead and pushed it. And I think you see now the success of that. I mean, they've done well. It's growing eightfold in a year now, kind of numbers. It's really, really huge. And the government and the regulators set direction and enforced what they wanted. So it made it a lot easier. Where India is sitting at the moment, they're now looking beyond India almost to say, how do we link this real-time environment that we've got in India with the Brazils of the world, with Thailand, et cetera, et cetera. And in contrast to that, America, which has also gone on its own drive, really looked at trying to create a secure system, an efficient system, and international compatibility. But what they did do there is they left the competition up to the internal players. And as a result, you almost don't hear about America and where they're going on the real-time payments. They've got a good system, I'm not saying it's bad, but they certainly haven't garnered the support and the expansion of real-time immediate payments that the rest of the players in the world have done, where they've driven and tried to achieve that. So just as really as a summary, open banking is a component of modernization, but it's facilitated through API. So they're all consequential things.
Brilliant. And Paul, just to add to that, I know you did address this in your keynote, but is there anything specific you want to hone in on that subject? And I think what would be interesting for the audience to know is where we've taken learnings from our global counterparts and implemented it within a South African context. And what are the key differentiators that you've seen from South Africa and our global counterparts?
Yeah, it's a...
Can we just stop for a moment and say...
I did ask.
That's a wonderful intro.
I love it. He's timing himself, it's like Osmond. Yeah, I think the whole notion of open banking, you can overly simplify it, as I said earlier, it's just an exchange of data. But probably before I talk about what other markets have done, I think the question we also need to, and I don't have the answer to, is as an industry, do you also look at a set of common APIs as a way of, fast tracking the open banking journey? Outside of the, because I look at open banking in two forms. So there's the PSD2 equivalent, which is regulated, and this is really mandated, exchange instead of data, and open banking in the context of partnerships with the sole objectives of, executing specific payments, non-payments, complementary payments use cases, right? And that can happen with or without regulation, and it's happening today. And I think, Gabriel will probably give you a better example, is that from a card ecosystem, you've had open banking for years. The whole idea of merchant aggregation is, partnerships between banks and non-banks to facilitate an exchange and push through a payment rail, right? Now, when you think back to, as we start delivering these various payment rails, and you are going to open up open banking both on the payment, on the KYC element, on the digital identity element, as an industry, at what point do you start considering common APIs to make the whole, execution easier and more consistent? So I think that's probably an open question that I don't think as an industry we have truly solved for. Is it an easy solve? I don't think so, because you are also questioning the journey that various players have already gone through. So some of the banks in South Africa have taken the initiative to build API marketplaces, to build for both payments and non-payment services. So now when you start advocating for common API standards, what do they do with what they've already built? So I think that's just an open thought that I want to leave for us to consider as we progress. But if you then you look into other markets, so where especially in the Indias of this world, so is that I don't think and I've not read or seen where that they've actually gone the common API piece. I think they were very aggressive on opening up those partnerships and saying access is the way to drive adoption. Access is the way to drive commercialization of both payment rails and non-payment rails. And I think how they brought together the I think it's the barter system and payment system into one, where it's again just testament of the fact that if you are able to drive that identity, access in terms of combining identity, account management, and payments into a solution that multiple players can play, I think you can drive adoption faster. So it's, in my sense, is that the whole idea of open banking, it can be, you can do it through regulation, which is, I think in South Africa we need a little bit of that, but also there is elements where I think players in the ecosystem can proactively open up access, and that we are seeing. I think 3 of the South African banks have open API marketplaces. Actually 4 of the banks in South Africa and big banks have open API marketplaces, both for payments, accounts, and accounts. I must be clear there. It's because it's new for them. They have only done that primarily on mobile accounts. So the wallet-based accounts as opposed to core banking accounts. But it is there, and can be done. But I think where I'm still not sure of is that as you start seeing this proliferation of APIs as an industry, do you need to start considering common APIs so that you have common data sets being exchanged and simplify the process? And that's probably the next RPP project in magnitude and size, or maybe Debbie check. I think it'll be probably that equivalent. Yeah.
Cool. So, Paul, one of the points you touched on there was around how the card facilitators have essentially created an ecosystem for open banking a long time ago, and I think we can't sit here and not speak about the fact that the card guys, the banks, and the regulators have created such an inclusive payments ecosystem already, and it's quite clear where you guys sit, even in this open banking model. But what I think would be interesting to discuss now is where the third parties play a role in this, and where the fintechs play a role in this. So, Lyle, I'm actually going to pose the question to you, and I want to ask where we looked at PayShop, for example. We looked at Capitec Pay. We're talking about the Rapid Payments Program and its implementation in South Africa. Where do fintechs play a part? Do we create a front-end experience for users? Do we have the reach? Where do we play a part, and how can we offer value in this ecosystem?
Thanks, Shay. I think Paul touched on some of the things here, is that I do think some of these initiatives are solving low-level needs, but I think it's a lot for the consumer to take in firstly. So I do think there's different products now available from different banks, and you need someone to potentially unify this to become like some type of open banking system for merchants, because I think we also focus on the payers a lot, but the merchants on the other side, right, they need to adopt as well. So we need to get adoption both on the user side and the merchant side to actually build this ecosystem. I think he touched on removing the friction, and I think working towards that, you need to kind of build this bigger ecosystem where having digital currency is as good as having cash, right? And unless you can spend that freely at a bunch of places, it becomes difficult for digital currency to compete with cash for some South Africans. I think where fintechs can basically solve this is, one, making it easy to understand for the end consumer. I think some of these things are difficult for the average man on the street to understand, the different options. I think also providing them with the best solution for them based on cost requirement in terms of how fast it needs to clear, like simplifying that for you as a user, so you don't have to worry about how much am I paying for this. Like fintechs can come to the party and say, they're going to make this get to its destination in a way that the receiver can understand it, right? So that doesn't delay also the fulfillment of whatever they're trying to buy. And that's like I think there's a lot of different friction points in the payments journey that I think fintechs are well positioned to establish. And I think also the bigger fintechs and the more established ones, because regulation is also a bit of a friction point for smaller guys as well. And I think the bigger guys enabling that for some of the new guys that are really innovative and are solving some niche problems there. I think there's a lot of room for fintechs to also provide services to other guys that have great ideas. They just need the platform to operate on.
Gary, go ahead.
If I could just add a little bit, I think the launch of RPP as a new channel is potentially disruptive, and is disruptive, because you get a lot of players now trying to position themselves and how they're going to get a slice of the pie, etc. So you're going to end up getting cooperation between a lot of different players, because the new RPP and PayShop, let's go whichever one you want to call it, it's got the facility to have a lot more than just payments information going through. Digital ID and all that. They are all new things. That means it's not just a fintech who does payments. It's a fintech who's playing in digital ID and that kind of stuff. So you're going to have to get cooperation between a lot of different people. And the people that choose not to cooperate will eventually be left on the outside, because you're going to find that the skills that come as a result of cooperation solve the problem. But if you end up using your hammer trying to break down a door and not cooperate, you're just going to end up getting further and further behind in that whole process. So I think cooperation is essential in that space, and it will happen. And the guys that do cooperate will probably advance quicker than the people who choose not to cooperate and try and stick to their control of the situation.
Brilliant. And I think off the back of that, we can see how the traditional providers have created that kind of space. But Gabriel, what I'd love to get some insight from you on is, we know that from a recent study, we could see that over 70% of South Africans are ready and enabled to transact through mobile payments. But there is a trust element that might be missing from that perspective. But from a MasterCard perspective, you guys have released products such as MasterPass, which is enabled for QR code scanning and payments through that avenue, which we know that has been a successful product for you guys. And I was interested to learn when I looked at this that the impetus behind that was to look at some untapped markets within the underbanked space and bring them into that sphere. So I'd love to talk to you about that and just get your insight into where you see the card providers playing a significant role in this space as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I think maybe just to touch on what Gary said initially, there's a couple of fundamentals that we have to agree on when we talk about open banking. I think one of those are that right in the center of it all is data, right? And the reason that PSD2 was required was because the third parties wanted access to consumer data. And so the question then goes, but why would they want access to consumer data? And the reason for that is that, well, the third parties thought that they could do a better job with some things for consumer that the people holding the data could. And if that's true, then the argument goes, well, what are you solving for? And I think initially there was a lot of conversation around personal financial management, for example. So can I as a consumer get the bank to release my data so somebody can help me do, understand my finances a little bit better and help me understand where all of the spending on my credit card goes to at the end of the month. And the second one is what we've talked about today, which is around payment initiation. And payment initiation becomes quite complex as you start thinking about use cases. But the reason all of that is relevant is because as the world is modernizing and as technology convergence continued, it's becoming a lot harder and more complex to connect people on that platform that Mpo mentioned earlier. So how do I get a consumer to link in with a merchant? And in that payment initiation space, that is an absolutely critical role that fintechs play. And so when we start thinking about how that all comes together, it is the ability for a consumer to exercise choice and say, look, I've got a problem that I want you to solve for me. A fintech saying, look, we think we've actually done a pretty good job in solving this particular point. And then be able to go to the bank who's the custodian of the data and say, under these circumstances, I'm comfortable for you to take my data and utilize it in a way that actually meets that consumer's pay point. So when you talk about MasterPass within the South African context, we've recognized that, long ago, back in 2011, 2012, that the existing payments infrastructure from specifically a person to merchant payments point of view within the bricks and mortar space is not necessarily sufficient to drive inclusion within the informal market within South Africa. And a couple of the structural issues revolved around things like the cost of capital deployment in order to provide people point-of-sale devices. It was just never going to happen where you can deploy a 8,000 or a 10,000 rand device in a spaza shop and expect people to walk in with a card and pay. And that's really where MasterPass came from. And we worked from 2014 onwards, we've worked to establish a QR-based system that allowed for payment. And that QR-based system is very much open to accommodate or consume other payment types. So, for example, PayShap or any other rail that is in there. But the basic fundamental here is that if we are going to take financial inclusion seriously, and we're going to be serious about digitizing the broader economy, we have to have the mechanisms around which we can connect consumers to merchants that allow for the exchange of value. And as soon as you allow for the digital exchange of value, then from there you can facilitate the sale of goods and services. And so I think that was an important pain point that we've solved for. And what we saw in COVID as an example is that activity from a purchase point of view for goods and services within those communities have risen significantly. So much so that, if you were to compare the total acceptance landscape in South Africa now, back to 2018, we've almost doubled the size of the market. And I think that what it's talking to is it's a new generation coming through. It's a generation that is not scared to digitize. It's a generation that is very comfortable on mobile. It's a generation whose primary interface is actually, from an internet access point of view, is on mobile. And therefore, the challenge to us, as all of the payment providers within the ecosystem, that we fulfill the glue. And the glue is the ability to connect that consumer with the right merchant that's going to, sell him something that he or she wants.
I do want to stick on that point, and Busi, I think this is where you can jump in. I mean, Capitec has over 20 million users at the moment. And so, from your perspective, especially with the inception of Capitec Pay, where your strategy was very clear to try and drive users towards this digital payment mechanism and enable people to transact on the digital economy, how do you think we can drive that usage and solve for Gabriel's point around working together to make sure that we do get as many users within the bank space to utilize these digital products?
Yeah. Let me just jump on what Gabriel was touching on, and I'm going to tell you a very practical story about myself. Right? That I grew up in the West End, so from where you went in Soweto to 10 kilometers down the road, that's where I grew up. It is an urban area, it's not rural. And my parents still live there. So every time I go home, I have to stop at a petrol station and withdraw cash. Right? And remember, I'm the head of payments, right? For a bank. Right? If I choose not to stop at that petrol station and withdraw cash, when I get home, I've got a few options. If I want to buy anything, and remember that it's important for me to be part of those local economies where I grew up. I want to spend money there. Right? If you go to many of those businesses, right, they will tell you that pay with cash. And if you don't have cash, some of them, they will have a device. But firstly, they'll tell you that you have to spend a minimum of 50 bucks. Some of them will say to you that, by the way, on top of that 50 bucks, you're gonna pay me 55 rands, right? There's a surcharge. And everybody here can say, oh my goodness, you are breaking industry rules and all of that. Try and have that conversation with the guy that's trying to sell you a loaf of bread, right? He doesn't care about those rules, right? Now, what this talks to is the point that Gabriel was referring to around acceptance, that we need to be clear that there's no single solution to this problem, right? And we also need to be clear that the common enemy in the room is cash. Unless we get to a point where we have enabled an ordinary guy that runs a spaza shop in Soweto or wherever, Gooks here in Cape Town, to accept these different types of payments in a manner that they believe is affordable to them, we're going nowhere. Right? The problem is not going to go away. Now, you've touched on Capitec that we've now gone beyond 20 million clients, and it's still growing. And the key thing is that how do I then enable a Capitec client to be able to spend in a digital format? And by the way, those Capitec clients, they still go to an ATM to withdraw the cash, right? Because where they live, nobody wants to, to accept whatever they believe that it costs them more, or they don't have the infrastructure to do that. Right? So for us, the key thing is around working within those communities, taking advantage of the fact that we've got 20 million clients. More than 10 million of them are actually digital. They use the Capitec app. Right? Now, if you go to a shop in Gooks and that shop is acquired, is a Capitec client as well. Can you see that within the Capitec ecosystem you are able to drive the adoption of digital payments? But you know what? That business doesn't only sell to Capitec clients, right? Maybe you can say 30% of the people that would come there would be Capitec clients. That's fine. But what must he do with the 66%? right? Those people will come in and they are not Capitec clients, but they still want to spend at that business. And what Mpo was talking about, right, that if we get this RPP right, and you bring it as one of the mechanisms of acceptance where an ordinary business can put a simple piece of paper with his cell phone number at his checkout, and very quickly somebody can pay them, irrespective of where they bank. That, for me, would be a good outcome. We would have gone a long way in addressing the problem of dealing with the prevalence of cash.
Awesome. Gabe, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that he said. But I think just to add a little bit, I think there's, South Africa as a percentage of total retail sales are still sitting at 90% cash, right? And I don't think that there's a one size fits all in the way that you digitize or modernize the economy. And we spoke a little bit earlier, Mpo, and mentioned the SARB's Vision 2025. And the SARB's Vision 2025 talks about the broad digitization for consumer, or I think there was a word called the democratization of payments that is called for as part of the Vision 2025 paper. And the reality is that that's not something that a single entity does. It's not something that a single bank does. It's something that the whole industry needs to do to come together and make it happen. From a MasterCard point of view, the way that we look at it, it's actually a global ambition of ours. So, MasterCard is committed to financially include 1 billion consumers over the next 5 years. And as part of that, specifically focus on bringing 50 million businesses into the formal economy. And it's the recognition that, in order for businesses to thrive and to be able to facilitate commerce, you have to provide the right tools to those businesses where they could meet the consumer where the consumer wants to be met. So in Mbuzi's case, that's at the petrol station, but it's also online. And, it's also within a mall, and it's also on a boat, and it's also, remotely when you make a booking. And it's in developing those use cases that ultimately we provide utility, and you provide something useful that consumers can understand. Nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to make a payment. If it's as seamless as possible and you're actually solving for a pain point that is real, that's when we all, from an ecosystem perspective, provide value. And I think that it's important that as we think about how do we meet the SARB's challenge and how do we modernize the broader payments ecosystem, how ultimately we do it in a way that facilitate interoperability, provide the right security that we can protect the funds from consumers, and ultimately ensure that there's, a level playing field to ensure that as many people as possible have access and have the ability to transact.
And Paul, I want to stick on that point, and let's talk about what the actual impact on the economy would be should we be able to have a significant effect or marked impact on the reduction on cash reliance. Let's talk about it in numbers terms. Like, what are we looking at here? What is the issue with cash currently, and why are we trying to actually resolve this issue?
Yeah, it's I think for me the exciting part around what the colleagues have shared is this whole idea of inclusion, right? And various payment rails, meeting at a consumer merchant point to Gabs, I like the word you use, meeting the consumer where they want to be met and do a payment. Now, you bring that to cash. I mean, I've already said earlier, just one example is that the cost of cash to the economy is significant, right? So you secure it, transport it, you plan for it, and you have to destroy it, right? Now, that you're looking in excess of 50 billion. So immediately just being able to digitize a small percentage of cash, you start eating into a cost that the economy consumes today that could be deployed in other value-adding economic activities. So that's just one element of it. And it's always easier to look at the direct cost, but I think what we mustn't ignore is the fact that digitizing the economy in itself opens up entrepreneurial opportunities. It opens up, entrepreneurial opportunities beyond just merchants. So when I was listening to everyone talking, and all I could think about, and it's around, ultimately, if you think fintechs as an example, where you have these multiple payment rails that needs to be orchestrated, right? At a point in time, you're starting to build businesses, fintech businesses that orchestrate payments, right? Now, that for me is again an economic impact that's undocumented, where just the very existence of the opportunities payments present opens up those entrepreneurial opportunities beyond people selling and buying things. Just the technology businesses that get built around the payment rail to either make it easy, convenient, and secure, right? And I think those things, I mean, I'll leave it to the economists to quantify the numbers, but those are real effects, right? So the very need of the meeting point between electronic payments and e-commerce led to the existence of Ozow and others, right? The economic impact of an organization like Ozow and other fintechs, where the amount of people they employ, the downstream impact of the businesses that they support, those things are the real impact of when you start thinking digital, when you start implementing digital payment solutions, you open up, opportunities, businesses, entrepreneurs that ideally you wouldn't do in a cash economy, because in its most simplest term, only one person counts the money, is the one that has it. Whereas in the digital economy, it touches so many. It's that orchestration, that documenting, that security that comes with it. I think those are the things that sometimes we discount with digital payments. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think, once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. So just to quote from, I guess, from my previous job, RTC transactions kind of running at about 20 million transactions a month. EFT is running at about 130 million transactions a month. 80% of that is your 3,000 and below rand value. So you've got 150, that's on us transactions, 150 on us, on them transactions flowing through. And the 80% of that volume is 3,000 rand and lower. So it's a significant portion of transactions that will be addressed by the value band that the economy has put in place with PayShop right now.
Can you just say those monthly figures again, please? EFTs 100.
So yeah, this is on them.
Do you still remember them?
This is not the on us stuff. This is the on them. The EFT is running at about 130 million, up to 130 million a month, and RTC is probably about 20 million, and the 80% of the transactions are your 3,000 and below. Yeah, so it's a significant portion of transactions that can be addressed by the RPP.
Of 80% of the 130 plus 20 million, 150 million.
Some quick math there, Gary.
Yeah.
I don't speak maths as a first language, so thank you.
You have to sometimes when you're in payments.
Studied English literature.
But again, I think the numbers he shared just tells you again the value bands that.
Someone get a type, double check the figures.
I can send you the exact figures if you need them. Cool.
Cool. And Niall, I want to throw it back to you as well. I think from an Ozow perspective, we've been on this journey of attempting or driving the decashing of the economy for a while. We are a business that is set in a foundation of financial inclusion. So anything that you can comment on from that perspective in terms of decashing the economy, removing cash reliance, and what we've seen and learned from our time within this space?
I think on a lot of I also grew up in the urban area, but where cash is predominant. And I think through our journeys to go and see how businesses interact with cash in these areas, you realize that it's an ecosystem where it works, right? But there are dangers of security and other issues that it brings in. And I think we've obviously tried a few different approaches. I think we're getting closer to not necessarily the solution, but playing a part as one of the members of this ecosystem that gives users a trusted solution where they don't need to carry cash. And I think that you can look at our wallet solution that we've introduced, which allows also users to pay via QR code as well. So maybe it didn't get the same traction as MasterPass, but it's used in a number of retail outlets, used by a number of informal merchants. And I think one thing we've also done is we've allowed informal merchants to register through Ozow to generate these QR codes as well, and try to give the smaller businesses the opportunity to transact for free where possible, to basically start driving that adoption of being able to accept digital payments without it costing them initially.
Yeah, I think we've seen it through some of the merchants that we've integrated with as well, where we've seen the merchant be the catalyst for that accessibility, and Ozow essentially enabling that from a payments infrastructure perspective. If you look at merchants like Yebo Fresh, for example, it's a great example, and some of our other merchants as well. So I want to talk about some of the challenges that we faced with the implementation of this overarching kind of open banking moniker. Again, and Paul, I think you and Gary know that this has been something that's been in the pipeline and being built over a number of years. So I want to talk about some of the challenges, but I want to speak about it in reference to how, again, with collaboration, we can overcome that. So I think just to spur on the conversation, I know that we've launched with 4 banks now. We don't know what the uptake specifically has been yet, but we will know soon. But there's a job to be done from a practical perspective in terms of each of us marketing and pushing PayShop and these other, such as the bank APIs, for example, to drive adoption within our current consumer base. So what are some of the challenges that you've seen, that you're facing, and how you think we can overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and so you're quite right. And we, like any other large program, you will always get to a point where you have to launch in cohorts. So, the launch of cohort 1, and which is the 4 banks. As I said earlier, we're looking to close out the year with a total of 8 banks live on the program, and which will be a significant win, right, in terms of truly creating an interoperable ecosystem. Now, I think the challenge with respect to adoption is going to be around, this is 8 different bank customers, 8 different user experiences, and getting that to a level where each of the bank customers sort of understands, how do I access it in my ecosystem, in my world, and how do I make sure that I'm able to use it, right, in the bank that I bank in. So, and we've invested a lot in our marketing around education. So you will see a lot of what we're doing is educating customers. Where do I fund it in my bank? How do I set my proxy up? And how do I use it? So I think that's the one. It's around differing experience. I think 2 is, we mustn't underestimate that the whole notion of proxy is a new concept, right? It's going to take time for customers to truly embrace the idea of a mobile number, a custom proxy, MPO, on a storefront window as a proxy for my account to be paid. That's going to take time for customers to, and I think the only way you get around that is, it's of course education, it's of course the expansion, so the democratization piece that I think both Busi and Gabriel spoke about, where you get more players into the ecosystem, because then they help with the education. So as much as in the rail, in the infrastructure, it is the banks that are leading the fray. I mean, we also need to appreciate that banks are not everywhere and in every corner of South Africa, right? So it is the partnerships with the entities that are in front of customers, the entities that are supporting those puzzle shops, that will ensure that you address that challenge around, the adoption of proxy. I think the challenge around the actual technology rollout, I think that we've long overcame. I think we spend a lot of time as industry building the standards, building the actual product solution. I think that's no longer a challenge. And I think we've established a rhythm also in terms of how are we going to deploy future product releases. I think we've set a set method that we will follow as an industry in terms of future product releases. So that I don't see as a challenge. I think for me, the biggest two challenges that keeps me awake is the UX across all of our participant banks and their subsequent partners, because they will eventually open this up to and that's why you'll hear I don't use the word proxy to an account. I use proxy to a store of value, right? And that store of value by design could be an account, could be a wallet, could be a third-party wallet, depending on how a bank enables its partners. So that UX, common UX, will be a challenge, and really getting to a point where customers are comfortable with the proxy. But we've got also good examples out in East Africa where with the M-Pesa ecosystem, the M-Pesa number in itself is a proxy, right? So, and that is commonly adopted, commonly used, and as you've heard about India, also commonly adopted. So I think there is also, it's all going to be down to education. Education.
Can I throw it to Boosie first and then Gary after that?
Yeah. So for me, I firstly want to have a mindset conversation around this concept of open banking. That for as long as we look at it as a compliance matter, that on its own creates certain problems, because people would do it just for the sake of being compliant. But if everybody sees it as an opportunity for partnerships and innovations and co-creation, then we start to think differently about how we can leverage that to create value for clients. But when I come to challenges, simplicity for me is one key thing. Right? So I was part of the South African team that went to India, Thailand, and one of the key things that came out there is that if I do a payment and I go beyond 4 clicks or taps on my phone, that already is friction, right? There was a guy from PwC who actually said that benchmark on 3. Can I take out my phone and within 3 clicks I have made a payment, right? And within Capitec, simplicity is one of those key things that is an area of focus. And we believe that for as long as we stick to that principle, that will contribute towards the adoption of these payments. Right? And the other thing is around terminologies or language, right? You would have seen that when Marley presented here, she emphasized on, what do we call this button, right? You say you are paying. Right? Today within Capitec, we've got people that use this pay to sell functionality, right? Which is a proxy payment, but more than 30 million transactions a month, right? People are already used to that concept that I pay to somebody's cell phone number. Right. Now, when you want to drive adoption, you leverage what people already know, right? So the language that we use, and I think as this thing evolves, we are going to get to a point where we start to simplify even what we call things, right? Because my goodness, how many people know what is a proxy? Very few people know that. And if you call this thing a proxy, you've lost, a whole group of people who don't know what a proxy is. Right? So it goes back to that simplicity and the ability to stick to simple language that an ordinary person can understand. And people must do less. You don't want people to say, it's hard work for me to make this payment. My goodness, I had to go through 10 screens before I could get it out.
I think the biggest thing everybody has to bear in mind, that you are looking to emulate cash. And that's the key here. That means immediate transfer. When you hand over that note to somebody, it's gone. Simplicity, I mean, I agree 100%. You've got a 10 Rand, a 20 Rand, 50 Rand, 200 Rand note, done. Yeah, you need to be free to exchange that. When I give you my 50 Rand, that's it. There's no hidden cost that comes after the fact. And it's that kind of stuff. So if you're emulating the use of cash, RPP, PayShop is going to be a great success. And that's one of the key factors that we have to bear in mind at all. Just think of cash at any stage, and if you're making it simple as cash, it's going to work.
So maybe just to add to some of that, I think the importance to remember with card being around now for more than 50 years, ultimately you're building a platform. And the platform is a function of how well you've set up those environments where consumers can go and pay. And that gives you a level of convenience to the consumer, or what we'd like to call utility. It's the ability to not worry about the amount of cash in your pocket, but knowing that you can pay. But I think the underlying thing that we also need to recognize is that there's an element, and it's a critical element, of certainty and trust. And it's certainty and trust within the ecosystem that you operate in, not just from the consumer's perspective to know that if he, makes this digital payment, that it's actually going to go through and he's going to be able to exchange value and get the goods and services that he's purchasing, but also the trust that if something does go wrong, that he'll be able to get his money back, and that everybody within that transaction honors the role that they play. And I think that what we often underestimate in across Africa, to be honest, is that element of certainty and trust is absolutely crucial to try and build scale. Because it's not just the consumer that needs to have the comfort and the need or the want to actually make the payment in the way that we are suggesting that they make it. But it's also the merchant saying that, look, if I release my goods, am I going to get settled? Am I going to get my money? And I think ultimately, it's those fundamentals that you have to solve for to build both sides of the platform. And it is a platform. It's always going to remain, the exchange of values. Busi said it nicely. Somebody that walks into a shop with, that banks with Capitec, it doesn't necessarily mean that merchant banks with Capitec. And so you are always going to exchange value between parties that do not necessarily know each other. And it is the underlying glue, that certainty and trust, that actually builds the ability to make that happen. And the way that you build that up is through uniformity of the UX that Mpho referred to earlier. The experience has to be the same across wherever, whichever channels that you're operating or interfacing from. There's got to be uniformity, and the customer needs to recognize it, and they need to be comfortable with it. It's a job that I think Ozow has done terrifically well within the e-commerce environment. I think the second portion of that is then to say, okay, once I have that, do I actually know how this works? One of the big lessons that we've had in QR payments over the last 10 years is that you can put a QR there, and people don't necessarily know what to do with it. And they say, well, what if my camera doesn't work and I can't scan the QR code? For us, living in payments every day, it was easy to say, well, just enter the 6-digit code at the bottom and then you're good to go. But if people don't know what you were talking about, it's like, what code are you talking about? I don't know what you want me to do here. And so the simplicity around it, to Busi's point again, in the way that we make these services available is absolutely critical. And we should never underestimate consumer education that, basically underlines and, provide the baseline for what we are actually trying to solve for, and be able to articulate the value story to both sides of the platform, i.e. the consumer as well as the merchant.
Awesome. So I want to close off with one final question, and we spoke about the challenges, and it leads into the opportunity. And Busi, I want to throw this one to you, because we've connected the fintechs with the banks in the case of bank APIs with Capitec Pay, and the opportunity there, which we saw and you guys saw in simplistic terms, was the opportunity to, one, leverage a bank API for guaranteed settlements and guaranteed payments, for example, but then at the same time, you guys using the third parties and the fintechs as a means of accessing merchants and millions of consumers. So talk to me a bit about that and where you see the further opportunities within the evolution of the open banking arena.
All right, so I'm going to answer this question through the lens of, call it an e-commerce platform, right? That, Gabriel, you spoke to it earlier, that, you know, the core business of that online merchant, it's not payments, right? His focus is the experience of his clients that come into this platform. Payments is something that just needs to happen, right? It's not a core of his function, right? Now, we need to understand that without that payment, though, the whole thing falls apart. And the role that TPPs have played is to actually simplify that process for the online merchant, right? And if I could, as a merchant, the fewer integrations I have to do, my life will be better, right? I don't want to plumb to 20, 30 different banks, right? I want to simplify that. Now, if you look at Capitec Pay, it is a no-brainer that partnerships with TPPs is critical, because you must never underestimate the effort involved in integrating a method of payment to a checkout point. That's not easy, right? So it makes sense that if you partner with TPPs, many of them are already plumbed into these online merchants. And by the way, it's not just big online merchants. You know, there are small businesses where, I mean, Ozow, you've got a whole host. You told us about your experiences in Soweto, that some of those businesses, because you've already done the groundwork, you've brought them into this ecosystem. If we want to extend payment services in partnership with yourselves, it's a no-brainer, right? Now, in terms of, you know, moving forward, for me it's around how you do more of this, and in a manner that firstly is trusted by clients, and it's got all the matters that Gabriel spoke to, that as a merchant I know the money will come, and if something is gone wrong, I know that there's a process that will be there to address all of those issues. So if we get all of that right, and we leverage the coverage that third-party providers already have, I think we'll make a big dent in moving people away from cash-based payments.
Lal, I'm going to leave you to close it off with that question. Where do you see the biggest opportunities in this space?
I think some of the numbers presented earlier about the 80% and the amount of time cash changes hands, I don't think we even understand how often cash is changing hands. But I think the biggest opportunity, I don't want to speak necessarily from a fintech side, but from a customer point of view, is where they can, like, I mean, it's when you hear of stories of people worried to take their pay money home because they might get robbed, and on payday, like, your domestic worker is basically taking it in portions because she knows on that day that she needs to be fearful to carry cash because she'll be targeted. I think when you start looking at the impact that this ultimately has on people's lives in terms of their cash is secure, well, not their cash, their digital currency is secure. They can spend that anywhere, and I think Card has done an excellent job in terms of setting the scene. So actually, my goal would be more to imitate Card as much as possible, because I think in terms of the security of Card, there's a number of steps there that actually protect the customer, and you can just tap and pay anywhere else. So I think it's in the benefit for people's lives, and that's going to drive the adoption from my point of view. So I do think the opportunity is to improve people's lives, and the adoption will come.
Brilliant. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm going to stop it there. I think we could carry on. I have a number of other questions that I could have asked as well, but I think that would take us into the evening. So great conversation. Thank you again. What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. I'm going to collect the questions that you guys have submitted through to Michelle, and then I'll grab a seat here again and we'll ask the guys a few questions. We'll spend about 20 minutes doing that, and then we'll close off proceedings from there. Once again, thank you guys very much. If we can give them a round of applause. And we'll be back in 5.